Imagine a still night in the heart of ancient China. Long before cities glowed with lantern light, and long before scholars traced their thoughts on delicate silk, the land was quieter than wide fields stretching beneath a soft moon, distant mountains sleeping under drifting clouds, and a hush so deep that even the wind seemed to move with care. In the province we now call Shanxi, the soil held a mystery it would keep for more than 2,000 years. A secret buried so carefully, so deliberately, that generations of farmers walked above it without ever imagining what rested below their feet. The earth was a layered memory yellow, loam stacked by time, river sediments hardened through age, and fine dust carried by ancient storms. From the surface, it looked ordinary enough. Wheat swayed in gentle rows. Spring rains painted the ground with glimmers of silver. Footpaths wound between villages where families lived simple, steady lives. But somewhere beneath these worn paths and quiet fields lay a hidden world crafted with impossible ambition. One that waited patiently for the moment when fate would allow it to rise again. For centuries, the land felt untouched by the stir of great empires or the noise of history's restless turning. Villagers tilled the same soil their parents once tilled. Children played in courtyards shadowed by old mulberry trees. The rhythms of life echoed softly, grain grinding on stone wheels, oxen pulling plows, elders speaking gently beside warm evening fires. They lived unaware that only meters below, an entire army slept in rigid formation. Rows upon rows of clay soldiers stood motionless in the darkness, their faces frozen in expressions crafted by artists, whose names had faded long ago. If you could descend through the earth and step into that world of shadow, you would feel the shift instantly. The air would become cooler. The silence would grow thick, almost tangible. And then, as your eyes adjusted, you would see them thousands of warriors carved from terracotta, aligned with the precision of a living army. Their armor detailed, their stances firm, their gazes steady. They stood as if awaiting a command, as if some distant drum might soon call them to life. Their presence filled the chamber like a breath held for centuries. But above ground, no one knew. The villagers plowed farther east, dug wells, planted orchards, lived quietly beneath the same sun that had once lit the path of a powerful emperor, whose imagination dwarfed the world around him, though legends persisted of a tomb so massive it took decades to complete. Though stories whispered of a palace beneath the ground, few dared to search for it. Most assumed such tales were woven by storytellers passing through markets. Undisturbed, seasons flowed gently over the fields like pages turning in a book spring blossoms. Dynasties rose and crumbled far away. Han, Tang, Song, Ming, each left its own wonders, its own scars. Empires changed their borders, scholars changed their philosophies, and warriors changed their loyalties. But the soil above the hidden army remained calm, patient. Nature shielded it with layers of dust, roots, and silence. No storm, no war, no shifting world above could erase the quiet determination of what lay beneath. There is something comforting about imagining the earth carrying such secrets. Something soothing about the idea that history can sleep peacefully for millennia, waiting for just the right touch of human curiosity to awaken it. The Terracotta Army had no reason to rush. It was created not for sunlight, but for eternity. Built to guard an emperor in the afterlife, sculpted to stand watch until time itself grew tired. And yet, Time moved gently. Morning light brushed the land with a pale glow. Nights folded softly into dawn. Rivers carved new paths, leaving faint murmurs in the distance. Even when storms rolled across the plains, the wind's howl could not reach the soldiers buried below. They stood silent, still untouched, shaped with care, sealed with intention, and preserved by the patience of the ground. Above them, the world changed again and again. Farmers rotated their crops. Villages grew and shrank. Children became elders who told stories beside crackling fires. Dynasties fell into memory, but the soil continued guarding its secret, wrapping it in darkness like a treasure wrapped in silk. The warriors waited. The horses waited. The chariots waited. The emperor they were meant to accompany waited in his hidden palace, deeper still. No footsteps disturbed them. No voice echoed through their corridors. No sunlight revealed the color that once painted their faces. Their watch was long, but unwavering. They were timeless guardians of a man who believed eternity needed protection, who believed power could follow him even into death, who believed that the boundary between life and the next world could be shaped by clay, fire, and imagination. If you listened closely at night, not with your ears, but with your imagination, you might almost sense it, a faint pulse beneath the land, a heartbeat of history resting just below the roots of wheat and wild grass, a quiet promise that one day, the surface world would change just enough, just suddenly enough, for the earth to open and reveal what it had lovingly kept hidden. And that moment would come. But for now, in this chapter of the story, we linger in the calm before discovery. We drift gently across the fields, imagining the layers of time stacked between us and the silent army below. We breathe in the soft air of ancient China, knowing that somewhere beneath our feet lies a world untouched by centuries, a world waiting to return to the light. Because even in the stillness, the earth remembers, and some memories are too powerful to stay buried forever. Long before the clay warriors were shaped, before furnaces glowed across the Qin heartland, and before the world learned the name of its first emperor, there was simply a quiet boy walking through palace corridors he could not yet command. His footsteps were small, but the shadows of the hall reached far, stretching over polished floors and rising columns as if they sensed the destiny waiting quietly in the edges of his life. His name was Ying Zeng, born into a land divided by endless conflicts, where powerful states jostled like restless storms and where ordinary people prayed each night for a peace they had never truly known. The China of his childhood was not a single nation. It was a puzzle of rival kingdoms, each dreaming of dominance, each sharpening swords for the next inevitable clash. Within the Qin palace, though, the world felt both protected and tense. Ministers moved with the smoothness of trained court officials, their silk robes brushing softly against the floor. Servants lowered their eyes as the young prince passed, unsure whether to treat him gently as a child or cautiously as a future king. Tutors instructed him in poetry, law, history, and philosophy, yet every lesson seemed to carry a hidden weight. They spoke of loyalty, ambition, legacy, and power not with casual interest, but with the seriousness of men who understood they were shaping someone destined to shape others. And perhaps this seriousness seeped into the prince's bones, for even as a boy, Zheng watched everything with a calm, steady gaze that unnerved those who underestimated him. Outside palace walls, rumors of battles never ceased. Messengers arrived breathless with reports from the borders. Generals visited the throne room at unpredictable hours, their armor dusty from long campaigns. The Qin state was strong, disciplined, and fiercely determined. But even its might could not silence the wider chaos of the warring states period. Zhen grew up hearing the clang of blacksmiths preparing weapons, sensing the urgency in his advisors' voices, and absorbing the knowledge that leadership in such a world demanded more than courage. It required vision sharp enough to pierce through centuries of discord. And then, at only 13 years of age, the boy stepped into the throne's shadow. His father died unexpectedly, and Zheng became king of Qin far earlier than anyone anticipated. The palace, already a place of tension, tightened further. Powerful ministers whispered behind screens. Influential families jockeyed for influence. Ambitious politicians believed a child king would be easy to control, a convenient figurehead behind which they could consolidate power. But Zheng, despite his youth, was already learning the deepest lesson of leadership. Silence is its own kind of strength. He studied those around him carefully. He nodded to advisors with polite restraint. He allowed powerful regents to believe they guided him. Meanwhile, he watched, absorbing every tactic, every trick, every shifting alliance. And somewhere inside him, the seed of his destiny began to sprout. He realized he would never be content to rule only Qin. The world was too fractured, too uncertain. People lived behind invisible borders drawn by men who had long forgotten the needs of ordinary families. If he could unify these lands, perhaps China could breathe again, not in fear, but in stability. By the time he reached adulthood, his temperament had hardened him to cruelty, as some later legends painted him, but into something rarer, unbreakable resolve. He took control of the court, removing those who misused his trust, elevating those with discipline and intelligence, and surrounding himself with minds capable of transforming dreams into plans. Among them was Li Si, a brilliant legalist thinker whose philosophies shaped much of what Qin would become. Li Si believed that unity required strength, and strength required order. His influence deepened the king's conviction. Authority firm enough to guide its turbulent lands into harmony, and so began one of the most extraordinary military and political campaigns. In the ancient world, war was not new to China, but the Qin armies moved differently. They were disciplined, methodical, relentless. Their soldiers trained under strict regulation. Their commanders strategized with precision. Their weapons, crafted from advanced bronze and iron, gave them an edge in battle. Zhang did not merely send armies forward. He directed them like a conductor shaping an orchestra, adjusting tempo, formation, and strategy with a clarity few rulers possessed. Behind his decisions was not bloodlust, but purpose, the dream of a unified land. Han was the first to fall. Its borders folded under the pressure of Qin's organized assault. Shao, known for its strong cavalry and fierce warriors, held out longer, but Qin's persistence carved through its defenses like water wearing down stone. Wei collapsed after a series of crushing defeats. The powerful Chu state resisted fiercely, but internal divisions weakened it from within, allowing Qin to advance with unstoppable momentum. Yan and Qi, the final states, fell in succession, unable to withstand the tide that had begun with a quiet boy's determination. And so, by the time Yingzheng stood at the height of his strength, all 7 major states were united beneath his authority. For the first time in the long, turbulent history of China, one ruler commanded it all. The magnitude of this accomplishment cannot be overstated. It was as though an unbroken thread had been stitched through a tapestry long torn in pieces to mark this unprecedented moment. Zheng took a new title, one never before spoken, Shi Huangdi, the first emperor. It was not a name of vanity, but of continuity. He saw himself as the beginning of a lineage beyond kingship, a new era where rulers would guide not fragments, but a whole civilization. And with this new identity came sweeping reforms. He standardized currency so trade would flow more smoothly from region to region. He unified weights and measures so that commerce, construction, and daily life could function with consistency. He standardized writing, allowing ideas to travel unimpeded across distances that once fractured communication. Roads were connected into vast networks, enabling faster movement of troops, merchants, and messages. Even axle widths for carts were regulated to ensure that ruts in the roads aligned, but the emperor's mind reached beyond governance. His gaze drifted toward the edges of mortality itself. He feared death not out of weakness, but because his imagination was too large to fit within a single lifetime. How could a man who built nations allow everything he created to vanish when his heart stopped beating? What would become of the unity he forged? Would the world revert to chaos? Would his legacy crumble? His fear shaped his most ambitious dream, securing his power not just in life, but in eternity. He sought immortality with passionate intensity. Scholars were summoned from every corner of the empire. Alchemists promised magical elixirs. Explorers were dispatched to distant seas where legendary islands supposedly granted eternal life. The emperor's hope flickered like a lantern in the dark, sometimes brightening with rumors, sometimes dimming with disappointment. Yet even with these efforts, a practical solution also formed in his thoughts. If immortality could not be granted through elixirs, perhaps it could be achieved through presence, through force, through symbolism, through a legacy so immense that even death would feel obliged to acknowledge it. And thus was born the idea of a subterranean world that would mirror his empire above ground. He envisioned soldiers standing guard through eternity, horses ready to charge, officials, musicians, weapons, towers all recreated in perfect detail. And somewhere, deep within the earth of future-day Shanxi, the first terracotta warrior began to take shape. Clay was molded, faces were carved, kilnness roared. Craftsmen labored night after night under torchlight, unaware that they were contributing to one of the greatest archaeological wonders the world would ever uncover. The boy, Prince, had become a king, and the king had become the first emperor. Now, the emperor prepared for a kingdom beyond life, a realm where his rule would never end, and the silence of the earth waited patiently. To understand the Terracotta Army, you must imagine a moment in time when an emperor's imagination grew, so vast that it spilled beyond the edges of the visible world. Qin Shi Huang, having unified China and reshaped an entire civilization through sheer willpower, turned his attention toward a realm no human had ever returned to describe. The afterlife, to him, was not a mysterious dream or a distant hope, was a continuation of rule, a domain waiting to be organized with the same discipline he demanded in life. And so, deep beneath the lands of future-day Shanxi, a vision began to unfold, one that would require thousands of hands, millions of hours, and a scale so monumental that even the workers who carved the first pieces did not fully understand its purpose. The emperor's architects were the first to receive the command. These were men accustomed to grand projects, fortresses, palaces, canals, but even they paused when the emperor's plan unfurled before them. They studied scrolls detailing underground chambers, branching corridors, layers of protection, and vast pits where armies of clay would stand in formation. It was not a tomb in the simple sense. It was a kingdom carved into the earth, a shadow empire designed to mirror the living one above. The architects bowed deeply, hiding their astonishment behind lowered eyes, and left to begin the most ambitious construction site the ancient world had ever attempted. The first thing they needed was space. Workers carved into the earth with shovels, picks, and baskets woven from reeds. The soil was lifted away in endless cycles, day after day, until the pits stretched wide and deep like open mouths awaiting a story. Dirt piled into mounds that would later become gentle hills, blending the landscape into something deceptively ordinary. Tunnels snaked downward into darker chambers. Hidden passages took shape. The underground palace expanded one sigh of torchlight at a time. Then came the craftsmen, thousands of them. Some were sculptors trained for years in shaping clay with precise, delicate hands. Others were potters familiar with the heat of kilns. Still others were painters, metal workers, mold makers, and laborers whose strong arms carried the raw earth that would soon become soldiers. They arrived wearing coarse clothing dusted by their daily work, their expressions a mix of curiosity and awe. None had ever participated in a project of such magnitude, yet each person soon discovered that their small contributions were essential threads in a much larger tapestry. The emperor did not want simple statues. He wanted an army, and so the laborers began by mixing clay-fine loess soil pulled from the region, crushed, filtered, and blended with water until it became both firm and smooth. They kneaded it like dough, pushing out air bubbles, shaping it into blocks that master sculptors could then begin transforming. Kilns were dug into the ground, some small, some large, built from brick and packed with wood that burned with intense, sustained heat. The glow from these kilns lit the night like scattered embers across a dark field, piece by piece. The warriors took form. The legs came first thick cylinders, shaped to support weight and balance. Then the torsos, hollow, carefully crafted to reduce cracking during firing. Arms were shaped separately, each forearm molded as if preparing to hold a bow, a spear, or the reins of a chariot. The heads, however, were the true soul of the project, and they were crafted with a level of detail that even modern visitors struggled to believe. Sculptors shaped cheeks, brows, noses, lips, and chins with gentle pressure. Clay softened under their fingertips, becoming something more than earth. Some sculptors gave their warriors stern expressions, others calm determination, others faint traces of youth or wisdom. It is said there are no two identical faces among all the thousands. And as you imagine those artisans sitting before their unfinished figures, stroking the clay until it seemed almost alive, you understand why these workers were not machines following identical instructions. They were artists, each pouring fragments of themselves into the clay. Armor plates were pressed into molds, giving texture to breastplates and skirts. Belts were added, carved with delicate ridges. Boots were shaped with patterns meant to resemble actual Qin military footwear. Hairstyles were sculpted to reflect ranked topknots, braided coils, carefully tied bows. Officers received more intricate hairstyles, generals, taller boots and heavier armor. Archers, thinner frames and lighter stance. The army grew not just in number, but in personality. a vast collection of individuals frozen in discipline. Across the pits, foremen called out instructions. Apprentices fetched tools, water, and fresh clay. Fires roared, hammers clanged. Even from far away, the sight must have looked like a living organism breathing, moving, pulsing with purpose. The emperor's dream was no longer a plan. It was becoming reality, and yet, for all the artistry, the work was exhausting. Craftsmen labored for long hours beneath the sun, their skin darkened by weeks of exposure. Some lived in temporary structures near the pits, close enough to begin at dawn without needing to travel. Others walked home through dusty fields each night, feeling the weight of both pride and fatigue dragging their footsteps. They knew the emperor's gaze metaphorically hovered over them, even if he was miles away in his palace. There was honor in the work, but also pressure, the kind of pressure that shapes not only clay but lives. As the warriors reached completion, they were painted in vivid colors, deep reds, shining greens, bold purples, rich blues, warm oak. Artisans used pigments made from minerals and plants, mixing them with natural binders to produce colors that glowed under torchlight. Imagine walking among the Terracotta Army not as we see it today, but as it looked then, bright, lifelike, almost startling in their presence. Fragments of this paint remain even now, evidence of a world that once shimmered with unexpected beauty. Weapons were forged separately by skilled men. Bronze, swords, spears, halberds, and crossbow bolts were carefully shaped, sharpened, and polished. Some weapons carried inscriptions identifying the worker who crafted them. Others bore marks of quality control. These were not decorative pieces, they were real weapons, sharp enough to kill, crafted to last through ages. The emperor wanted nothing less than authenticity, even in death. As each figure was completed, it was transported to its assigned spot in the pit. Workers lifted them with ropes and wooden supports, adjusting their positions so they stood in perfect formation. Officers were placed near the front, soldiers in rows behind them, archers along the flanks. Horses were arranged in teams, attached to clay chariots that mirrored those used in battle. The effect was astonishing, a full military unit ready to march, except for the quiet that surrounded it. Imagine standing in that massive pit as torches flickered along the walls, illuminating thousands of faces looking forward with unwavering focus. It must have felt like standing inside history before it even became history, above ground. Entire workshops were built to support the project. Storage rooms housed pigments, tools, clay, and water. Barracks held the workers. Supervisors recorded production tallies on bamboo slips. The hum of activity was constant, unbroken, fueled by the emperor's unending drive, and beneath it all, silently, the earth accepted the army being prepared to live within its depths. Layer after layer of clay figures filled the pit's warriors, charioteers, cavalrymen, archers. By the time the work reached its greatest momentum, it is estimated that more than 700,000 workers, artisans, laborers, and supervisors had participated in the construction of the emperor's mausoleum and his underground defenses. This was no longer simply a project. It was a world being built in shadow, and as the underground kingdom expanded, something profound happened. The craftsmen began to understand that they were not merely building for the emperor. They were building something that felt larger than their own lives. Something that might outlast them. Something that might whisper across centuries. The emperor's dream was becoming a reality, and the terracotta army, the silent force guarding his eternal reign, was rising, one sculpted breath at a time. If you were to step quietly into the long, shadowed pits of the Terracotta Army as they once appeared, painted gleaming, complete, you might feel at first as though you had interrupted a moment frozen between breaths. Thousands of warriors stood shoulder to shoulder, arranged in perfect formation, each with a gaze fixed upon a horizon they would never see. There is a strange magic in their stillness, a tenderness almost, as if their silence carries the weight of stories the world has forgotten. For although they are made of clay, they were shaped by human hands, hands belonging to craftsmen whose own lives were marked by dreams, fears, and the simple desire to leave behind something meaningful in a world ruled by an emperor too powerful to ignore. Each warrior, when viewed up close, reveals a personality. One has a broad jaw and serious brow, as if contemplating an unspoken worry. Another wears a faint smile, lifting one corner of his mouth, a look that makes you wonder whether the artist who shaped him had someone particular in mind. Another still has a face lined with age, suggesting a soldier who had lived many campaigns before offering his likeness to the emperor's eternal guard. Though made of the same clay, no two faces are identical, and this individuality is perhaps the most astonishing truth of all. The sculptors saw their task not as producing mere copies, but as creating an army of souls. It is comforting to imagine that these faces reflect the people who made them. A gentle sculptor might have shaped a soft expression. A stern one might have carved sharper cheekbones, firmer eyes, a stronger jaw. The terracotta warriors, in this way, become a quiet testament to the craftsmen whose hands guided the claymen who lived during a time of strict discipline, who belonged to an empire of immense ambition. Imagine them hunched on small wooden stools, the glow of candles illuminating their focused expressions. They leaned close to their clay figures, sculpting eyebrows with narrow tools, pressing lines into lips with gentle precision, and smoothing surfaces with damp cloths. The room around them echoed with murmurs, discussions of family, observations about the emperor, hopes for rain, worries about illness. Though they worked under imperial orders, their daily concerns were as ordinary as those of any family anywhere in the world. And yet, without knowing it, they were creating something extraordinary. Perhaps the most remarkable detail is that before the warriors were placed in the ground, they were painted with such vivid color that they resembled living soldiers. The pigments blue from azurite, red from cinnabar, purple from rare mineral blends, glowed beneath sunlight and torchlight alike. Imagine an underground corridor filled with brightly colored armor, bronze weapons polished to a soft shine, and hundreds of faces so lifelike you would almost expect them to blink. That moment, before time stripped their pigments away, must have been breathtaking. It must have felt like standing inside a living dream. But while we marvel at the craftsmanship, we often forget to imagine the lives of the people who created this world. These artisans were not immortal. They lived ordinary days, woke before dawn, ate simple rice meals, returned home to their families at night when permitted, and sometimes fell asleep beside the warmth of clay that had cooled beneath their hands. Their children might have asked what they were making, and maybe the craftsmen spoke cautiously, for these projects were shrouded in secrecy. And yet, there would have been pride in their voices. Pride in knowing they were shaping something no one else in history could compare to. The laborers who transported the clay soldiers felt this pride too. They carried the heavy figures with wooden harnesses, breath steadying as they lowered each warrior into the pit with gentle precision. Some whispered prayers for the safety of their backs. Others marveled at the size of the army growing beneath the earth. They did not question the emperor's desire. They only understood the scale of his dream. And in this understanding, they became part of something immense. But the warriors' silence also reminds us of the soldiers they represent. The Qin army, real men of flesh and bone, marched across valleys, climbed mountains, and crossed rivers in the emperor's quest to unify China. They traveled great distances, slept beneath the stars, held their positions through scorching summers and freezing winters, and fought battles that shaped the entire future of their land. Many never returned home. Their parents received no letters. Their wives waited at doorways long after hope had faded. Their children grew up hearing stories of fathers they barely remembered. It is these real soldiers whose presence echoes in the clay. Look closely, and you will see traces of them. The set of a jaw hardened by discipline, the slight slouch of a man accustomed to long marches, the lifted chin of a commander whose voice once carried over the clash of battle. The Terracotta Army is a memorial not only to the emperor's vision, but also to the countless lives woven into the fabric of the Qin dynasty. Behind every clay warrior stands a human life that shaped China's early history, though their names are lost. Consider, too, the armor each figure wears. The sculptors crafted every plate and seam with stunning accuracy. The rectangles of the lamellar armor overlap just as they would in real life, providing flexibility and protection. The belts buckle naturally around the waist. The folds in the garments fall with believable weight. These details reveal not only artistic skill, but also a deep familiarity with the warrior's life. Marched beside them, or lost friends to battle, preserved their memory in clay. The silence of the Terracotta Army is not empty. It is full of echoes of laughter from workers who joked while shaping ears and noses. Full of sighs from tired artisans, smoothing armor plates at the end of a long day. Full of murmured stories passed from sculptor to apprentice. Full of unspoken memories of real soldiers who once patrolled the empire they helped forge. Full of the quiet heartbeat of a dynasty that changed the course of Chinese history. And full of something else, too, a kind of humility. Because although this army was made to protect the emperor in the afterlife, it has become something larger, a testament to human creativity, dedication, and the desire to make something that lasts. The workers who built it likely never imagined that their creation would one day be admired by millions from around the world. Centuries after their own lives had faded into dust, standing before the warriors today, you might feel a surprising emotion, not awe alone, but connection. Something gentle and grounding, like a reminder that history is shaped not only by emperors and generals, but also by ordinary people whose hands mold the world quietly, patiently, from the shadows, in the stillness of the Terracotta Army. The lives of these forgotten artisans linger. In every face, a whisper. In every stance, a story. And in their silence, a chorus of unspoken humanity, soft, patient, eternal, waiting for those who pause long enough to listen. The step remembers those who walk it long enough. It remembers their footsteps, their patience, their choices. After captivity and exile, Temujin returned to the land not as a boy chasing safety, but as a man shaped by restraint and understanding. He no longer moved with urgency. He moved with intention. Each camp he approached, each conversation he entered, carried the quiet weight of someone who had learned when to speak and when to listen. The Mongol steppe, wide and unforgiving, had taught him that survival alone was not enough. One needed people, and people needed a reason to stay. Temujin began by gathering those no one else wanted. The displaced, the men whose clans had been shattered by war or betrayal, those who had lost fathers, brothers, herds, and hope. These were not noble warriors seeking glory, but survivors searching for stability. Temujin welcomed them without asking about lineage. He asked only about loyalty and effort. In return, he offered protection, shared food, and fairness, things rare on the steppe. Life within Temujin's growing circle was simple but deliberate. Food was divided equally. Spoils from raids were shared rather than hoarded. Decisions were explained rather than imposed. This was not generosity born from softness, but strategy shaped by experience. Temujin understood hunger. He understood abandonment. And he knew that men who felt protected would protect in return. Slowly, word spread. People spoke quietly at night, around low fires sheltered from the wind. They spoke of a leader who did not abandon the weak, of a man who punished betrayal but rewarded loyalty without hesitation, of a camp where children were fed first and warriors were judged by action rather than ancestry. These whispers traveled faster than banners ever could, carried by riders moving between camps, carried by memory. Temujin watched carefully as his following grew. He did not rush to declare power. He did not provoke unnecessary conflict. Instead, he allowed unity to form naturally, bound together by shared hardship and shared reward. Men followed him not because they feared him, but because life felt more stable under his guidance. The steppe noticed this difference. As his group expanded, Temujin began organizing his followers in ways unfamiliar to traditional Mongol clans. He grouped men by loyalty rather than blood. Brothers were separated if discipline required it. Friends were tested through responsibility. Each man knew his role. Each man knew the rules. This structure created something rare on the steppe order without oppression. Raids became more disciplined. Horses moved in coordinated patterns. Attacks were swift and purposeful rather than chaotic. Temujin avoided unnecessary cruelty. He punished resistance firmly, but spared those who surrendered. This approach confused his enemies. They expected brutality. Instead, they encountered calculation with each small victory. Temujin's authority deepened, yet leadership brought its own weight. Temujin understood that every follower trusted him not just with battle, but with survival. When food was scarce, the pressure grew heavier. When storms destroyed grazing land, decisions became harder. But Temujin did not hide behind command. He shared hardship openly. He rode with his men. He ate what they ate. He slept under the same sky. This shared endurance forged loyalty stronger than fear. Temujin also learned to balance mercy with control. Mercy was offered strategically, not emotionally. These choices were not easy. They required the discipline to silence personal feelings in favor of collective survival. The steppe demanded leaders who could make such decisions without hesitation. As seasons passed, Temujin's name began to carry weight. Not the weight of terror, but of reliability. Clans began to consider alliance rather than opposition. Some joined willingly. Others were absorbed after brief conflict. Each integration strengthened Temujin's growing network. What had once been a scattered group of survivors slowly transformed into a structured force. Yet, Temujin never forgot how fragile loyalty could be. He remembered abandonment. These memories kept him alert, cautious, and disciplined. He trusted systems more than promises, rules more than emotion, fairness more than tradition. In quiet moments, Temujin often sat alone beneath the stars, listening to the wind move through the grass. He reflected not on conquest, but on balance. He understood now that power was not taken, it was built, brick by brick, decision by decision, trust by trust. The Mongol steppe, once a place of endless uncertainty, had begun to change around him. Not visibly, not dramatically, but steadily. Camps aligned. Riders carried messages. Paths converged. A new center of gravity was forming. Temujin was no longer merely surviving. He was gathering, and with every man who chose to stay, with every family that found safety within his growing circle, the shape of something unprecedented began to emerge. Unity not seen on the steppe before. The rise of Genghis Khan continued quietly, not with thunder, but with loyalty earned through shared survival. Sleep now. The next chapter of history awaits. Beneath the disciplined stillness of the Terracotta Army, deeper than the ranks of soldiers and the waiting horses, there lay another world, one not meant for battle, but for rule. This was the heart of Qin Shi Huang's eternal vision, the place where his spirit would dwell, govern, and continue the work he believed destiny had assigned to him. It was not a tomb in the way we imagined quiet chambers and sealed stone. It was an underground palace, vast and deliberate, designed to mirror the empire above with all its order, beauty, and cosmic balance. Ancient texts speak of it with reverence and caution. They describe a realm carved beneath the earth, protected by layers of secrecy and guarded by fear as much as loyalty. The emperor ordered that mountains and rivers be recreated in miniature, that the geography of his unified China be laid out below ground as carefully as it had been organized above. This was not merely symbolism. To Qin Shi Huang, harmony between heaven, earth, and ruler was essential. His afterlife would be governed by the same principles that shaped his reign: precision, balance, and control. At the center of this underground palace flowed rivers made not of water, but of mercury. To modern ears, this sounds like legend, a flourish added by storytellers centuries after the emperor's death. But the idea was rooted in ancient belief. Mercury, shimmering and alive even in stillness, was thought to hold magical properties. It moved like liquid metal, reflecting light as though it carried pieces of the sky within it. The emperor believed Mercury symbolized immortality, power, and transformation, an element worthy of mapping the great rivers of his empire beneath the earth. Imagine these rivers gliding through carefully carved channels, their surfaces catching the glow of torchlight, creating a soft, eerie radiance that danced across stone walls. The Yellow River, the Yangtze, and countless smaller waterways were said to be represented, each flowing endlessly in silent motion. It must have felt like standing within a living map, a miniature world held in metallic reflection, forever circling beneath the soil above these rivers. The ceiling was transformed into a sky. Artisans embedded pearls and gemstones into the stone, arranging them to represent constellations known to ancient Chinese astronomers. Stars shone softly in the darkness, forming patterns that mirrored the heavens above. This was no decoration meant for visitors. It was a cosmic statement. The emperor placed himself at the center of the universe, earth beneath him, sky above him, rivers flowing at his command, stars fixed in their eternal paths. In life, he ruled by mandate of heaven. In death, he would continue that alignment, suspended between worlds. The labor required to create such a space was immense. Stonecutters worked slowly, carving chambers deep within the earth, ensuring stability so the ceiling would not collapse. Engineers planned ventilation and drainage. Craftsmen polished surfaces meant to reflect light gently rather than harshly. Everything was calculated. Nothing was accidental. Shaped by thick walls and deep earth that absorbed sound until the world above became a distant memory. Yet the underground palace was not only a place of wonder, it was also a place of fear. The emperor was deeply protective of his secrets. The exact location of his burial chamber was guarded with extreme care. Workers were sworn to silence. Some stories suggest that once construction was complete, those who knew too much were never allowed to leave. Whether these tales are fully true or softened by time, they reflect the atmosphere surrounding the projector, blend of awe and dread that clung to the emperor's final creation. Two walked through this palace. If it were ever revealed, would feel like stepping into the mind of Qin Shi Huang himself. His brilliance and paranoia, his vision and anxiety, his desire for order and his fear of chaos are etched into the stone. The rivers of Mercury speak of his longing for immortality. The starry ceiling reflects his belief that his rule was written into the cosmos. The surrounding army stands as proof that even in eternity, he expected resistance and prepared for it, above ground. The emperor continued his relentless search for eternal life. He sent envoys to distant seas in search of mythical islands. He consumed elixirs mixed by alchemists who promised miracles. Ironically, many historians believe these mixtures, often containing mercury, may have hastened his death rather than prevented it. There is a quiet sadness in this contradiction. A man who conquered the world, undone by the very substance he believed would save him. When Qin Shi Huang finally died in 210 BCE, the world above trembled. His death was kept secret for weeks as his body was transported back to the capital, surrounded by officials desperate to maintain order. The empire he built was strong, but it was also tightly bound to his presence. And beneath the earth, the underground palace waited complete, sealed, and silent. The burial was carried out with careful ceremony. The army was locked in place. The chambers were sealed. The rivers of Mercury were set to flow endlessly. The starry ceiling was left to glow in darkness. And then, slowly, the entrances were closed, hidden, erased by time and intention. Earth was piled above, smoothing the surface until the land looked ordinary once more. And so the emperor entered eternity. For centuries, the underground palace remained untouched. Dynasties rose and fell above it. Empires expanded and collapsed. Scholars debated Qin Shi Huang's legacy, some condemning his harsh laws, others praising his unification of China. Farmers tilled the land, unaware of the cosmic palace resting beneath their crops. The mercury flowed quietly. The stars remained fixed. The army stood watch. There is something deeply calming in this image, that because it celebrates power, but because it reveals humanity's timeless struggle with impermanence. Qin Shi Huang tried to build a world that could not decay, a universe sealed against change. And yet, it was change that preserved his creation, buried away, protected from light and disturbance. His underground kingdom survived where so many surface monuments did not. Today, scientists still approach the emperor's burial chamber with caution. Mercury levels in the soil remain unusually high, lending credibility to ancient accounts. Technology advances slowly, carefully, respecting both the danger and the wonder of what lies below. The palace remains sealed, not as a failure of discovery, but as a testament to patience, a reminder that some parts of history are meant to be approached gently. In time, with humility, as night settles over the land above the tomb, stars fill the real sky, mirroring those embedded below. The wind moves through fields, rustling crops that grow where emperors once dreamed of eternity. And beneath it all, the underground palace continues to exist in perfect stillness, a place where rivers shine without water. Remains suspended between imagination and earth. It is not a place of noise or fear. It is a place of quiet ambition, finally at rest. A hidden universe sleeping beneath the world. After the last stone was set in place, and the final entrance to the underground world was sealed, silence descended with a gentleness that felt almost merciful. The Terracotta Army, the underground palace, the rivers of Mercury, and the ceiling were all folded into darkness, wrapped carefully by the earth itself. Above them, life resumed its familiar rhythms. Birds returned to the fields, wind brushed softly across the soil, and history, unaware of what it had just buried, continued its long and restless journey forward. The death of Qin Shi Huang did not bring peace to the empire he left behind. Without his commanding presence, the tightly controlled system he built began to strain. Rebellions flared like sparks in dry grass. Officials struggled to maintain order. Within only a few years, the Qin dynasty collapsed, replaced by the Han. New rulers rewrote laws, softened punishments, and distanced themselves from the harsh image of the first emperor. Above ground, his name became controversial, debated by scholars, and whispered cautiously by officials. But below ground, the Terracotta Army did not care. It did not rise in rebellion. It did not decay in anger. It simply remained as decades turned into centuries. The land above the tomb transformed again and again. The Han dynasty flourished, bringing stability, trade, and cultural expansion. Confucian ideals shaped governance. Cities grew, temples rose, and scholars filled libraries with careful brushstrokes. And still, beneath the soil, thousands of clay warriors stood unmoving, untouched by politics, untouched by praise or condemnation. Dust settled slowly around them, a fine veil drifting down through cracks in the ceiling, carried by subtle shifts in the earth. Wood decayed where it existed, but the clay endured. Paint began to fade in darkness, colors dimming quietly without sunlight. Bronze weapons oxidized gently, developing soft green and brown hues. The army aged, not through destruction, but through patience. Storms came and went above. Heavy rains soaked the fields. Dry seasons baked the soil hard. Earthquakes rolled through the region, shaking mountains and altering river paths. Dynasties rose the Thames with its poets and painters, the Song with its scholars and innovations, the Yuan with its foreign rulers, the Ming with its walls and voyagers. Each left its mark on China's surface, but none reached deep enough to disturb the emperor's sleeping world. Villages appeared near the tomb, then faded away. New villages formed in their place. Families farmed the same land for generations, unaware that their ancestors' footsteps echoed above one of the greatest human creations ever made. Oxen pulled plows over soil that concealed chariots. Children chased one another across ground that hid generals. Wells were dug, trees were planted, and homes were built, without revealing the army waiting quietly below. Occasionally, stories surfaced. Elders spoke of strange ground that shimmered after rain. Hunters whispered about unusually shaped earth when the moon was bright. Some claimed that digging too deeply in certain places brought bad luck. Others told legends of a buried palace guarded by spirits, warning listeners not to disturb the land. These tales drifted from mouth to mouth, changing slightly each time, until they became folklore interesting, but easy to dismiss. And so the Terracotta Army slept on. What is remarkable is not only that it survived, but that it survived unnoticed. Wars passed overhead. Armies marched not far from the tomb, their boots pounding the earth in rhythms not unlike those of the clay soldiers below. Fires burned villages. Rebellions shook regions. Yet the underground world remained sealed, protected by the very weight of time. Where exposure might have destroyed it, burial preserved it. Darkness became its guardian, as centuries stacked upon one another like layers of sediment. The army took on a new role, not as defenders of an emperor, but as witnesses to human impermanence. Every dynasty believed itself strong. Every ruler imagined their power would endure. And yet all passed away, leaving behind fragments for historians to gather. Meanwhile, the Terracotta Army remained whole, intact, patient. It did not claim victory or defeat. It simply waited. There is something deeply soothing about this image. An army that never marches, never attacks, never retreats. An army that does not hunger, does not age, does not tire. An army that exists outside the noise of ambition and the rush of fear. While the world above rushed forward, the world below rested. Over time, the memory of Qin Shi Huang softened. Scholars debated his legacy with distance rather than passion. Some criticized his harsh laws. Others admired his vision and administrative brilliance. His tomb became a line in historical records, vague and mysterious, its exact location uncertain. No one could say for sure what lay beneath the fields of Shanxi, and few truly tried to find out. And so the army became part of the earth itself. Roots pressed gently against clay forms. Moisture traveled slowly through soil and stone. Tiny movements in the ground caused slight shifts, barely perceptible, like a sleeper adjusting position in a deep dream. The warriors remained standing, their silence unbroken, their purpose slowly transforming from imperial protection to historical preservation. If you imagine this long sleep from the perspective of the soldiers, it feels almost peaceful. There is no urgency, no command to obey, no enemy to face, just the steady presence of time flowing without resistance. The clay does not worry about the future. It does not mourn the past. It exists entirely in the present, even as centuries pass above it. This long dormancy is what makes the Terracotta Army so powerful when it is finally rediscovered. It does not belong to a single moment in history. It bridges thousands of years in a single breath. It connects ancient ambition with modern curiosity. It reminds us that the greatest creations are not always those that dominate their time, but those that endure quietly beyond it as night settles. Again over the land, as it has done countless times before, the fields rest beneath starlight. The wind moves gently through grass. Somewhere, a farmer locks his door and prepares for sleep, unaware of the ancient guardians beneath his feet. And below, in perfect formation, the Terracotta Army continues its watch, not for conquest, not for power, but for the simple act of remembering. Centuries pass, dust settles, and the army sleeps on, undisturbed, carrying the weight of history in silence. In the spring of 1974, the land above the sleeping army looked no different than it had for generations. Fields stretched outward in patient rows. The air carried the soft scent of soil and young crops. Life in the villages near Cheyenne followed familiar rhythms shaped by weather, labor, and quiet perseverance. There were no banners, no scholars, no signs that history was about to stir. Only a group of farmers, hands calloused and minds focused on survival, working beneath a pale sky that promised rain, but delivered little. Water was scarce that year. The earth had grown stubbornly dry, and wells that once provided relief had begun to fail. So the farmers did what farmers have always done when nature tests them: they dug deeper. Shovels broke the surface, lifting lower soil in steady motions. Each strike was ordinary, unremarkable, guided by muscle memory and hope. No one expected answers from the ground. They were only asking for water. Then the earth answered differently. A shovel struck something solid. Not stone, not wood. Something hollow, brittle, unfamiliar. The sound was dull, wrong. The farmer paused, brushed soil aside, and uncovered a fragment shaped too deliberately to be natural. A piece of clay curved, smooth, unmistakably human in its contour. Another strike revealed more. A shoulder, a torso, a face emerging slowly from centuries of sleep. The farmer stepped back, heart beating faster, unsure whether to feel awe or fear. At first, confusion ruled the moment. Some thought it was a statue from a forgotten temple. Others whispered of ancient spirits, disturbed by the digging. Pieces of clay lay scattered in the pit arms' heads, fragments of armor broken by the shovel's intrusion, but still unmistakably purposeful. The land, silent for more than 2,000 years, had finally spoken. Word traveled quickly through the village, then beyond it. Curiosity drew neighbors to the site. Someone contacted local authorities. They stood at the edge of the pit, eyes scanning the fragments, their professional calm barely concealing the tremor of realization. This was not a single statue. This was something far larger, something organized, something immense. Carefully, methodically, they began to dig. What emerged was beyond expectation. Row after row of clay soldiers revealed themselves, standing exactly as they had been placed centuries earlier. The earth peeled back gently, like pages of a book long sealed. Faces appeared one by one, each distinct, each carrying an expression shaped by hands long gone. Weapons lay where they had been positioned. Boots rested on packed soil. Formation followed formation, disciplined and precise. The farmers watched in disbelief as the ordinary ground they had known their entire lives transformed into a doorway to the ancient world. The discovery rippled outward, capturing the attention of China and then the world. News spread through newspapers, radios, and conversations whispered with excitement. Scholars arrived from distant cities. Experts debated theories beneath temporary shelters erected over the pits. The quiet fields became a place of careful movement, hushed voices, and reverent pauses. The land that once asked only for water was now offering history. Yet the moment was not triumphant. It was delicate, as archaeologists exposed the warriors to air and light for the first time in millennia. Something unexpected happened. The vibrant colors that once covered the figures' reds, blues, purples, greens began to fade almost instantly. Pigments that had survived centuries in darkness could not withstand sudden exposure. Within minutes, colors curled, cracked, and vanished, leaving behind the muted clay we recognize today. It was a heartbreaking reminder that discovery is not always preservation, and that time guards its secrets fiercely. From that moment on, the work became slow and careful, guided by patience rather than excitement. Archaeologists realized they were not uncovering an object, they were awakening a world. Every movement had consequences. Every breath of air changed something. And so the excavation transformed into a long conversation between past and present, one that required listening as much as action. As pits expanded, the scale of the Terracotta Army revealed itself fully. Thousands of soldiers stood in silent ranks. Horses waited harnessed. Chariots aligned. Officers positioned with authority. It was as if the emperor's command had only just been paused, not ended. The realization settled gently but firmly. This was not a burial ornament. It was an entire military force, preserved with astonishing intention. The farmers who had struck the first piece of clay stood quietly at the edge of history, unsure how to place themselves within it. Their discovery was accidental, unplanned, born of necessity rather than curiosity. Yet, without their simple act of digging for water, the army might have slept even longer. But to ordinary people following the rhythms of survival, as weeks turned into months, the site became a place of careful wonder. Temporary roofs were constructed, tools were refined. Scientists studied soil composition, pigments, and firing techniques. Conservators searched for ways to protect what had been exposed. The army did not rise suddenly into the world. It emerged slowly, thoughtfully, like someone waking from a very long sleep. Visitors who came early described the experience as surreal. Standing before rows of warriors, they felt time compress. 2,000 years elapsed into a single breath. The figures did not feel ancient in the distant sense. They felt present, alert, dignified, patient. Their silence spoke louder than any inscription. The discovery changed how the world understood Qin Shi Huang. No longer was he only a figure in texts, harsh, brilliant, obsessive. He became tangible. His ambitions stood face to face with modern eyes. His belief in eternity was no longer abstract. It was physical, vast, undeniable, and yet the earth had revealed only part of its secret. The emperor's burial chamber remained sealed, protected, untouched. The rivers of mercury still flowed unseen. The starry ceiling still glimmered in darkness. Archaeologists chose restraint over intrusion, understanding that some parts of history must remain sheltered until the right moment, until knowledge and care grow deep enough to meet them. As evening fell over the excavation site, the fields returned to quiet. Tools were set aside. Tents fluttered softly in the breeze. The clay soldiers, now partially revealed, stood beneath protective roofs, their watch continuing in a new way. They were no longer guarding an emperor. They were guarding memory itself, and the farmers, walking home beneath a softening sky, carried with them the knowledge that beneath the most ordinary ground can rest the most extraordinary stories. Sometimes the earth waits patiently for centuries, trusting that one day someone will listen. The shovel strike that day did not just seek water, it opened a dialogue with time, and the earth, at last, chose to speak. Once the earth had spoken, it could not be asked to fall silent again. The Terracotta Army, revealed by chance and necessity, now stood at the center of a task as immense as its original creation, not the work of emperors or armies, but of patience, care, and humility. The challenge before archaeologists was unlike anything faced before. They were not simply uncovering objects. They were awakening a sleeping world, one breath at a time, knowing that every careless movement could erase details preserved by centuries of darkness. The first lesson came quickly. Exposure was dangerous. As soon as the warriors met open air, the colors that once clothed them began to retreat. Pigments that had rested peacefully in sealed soil reacted violently to light, oxygen, and changes in humidity. Reds darkened and vanished. Blues cracked into pale dust. Purples curled and fell away like fragile leaves. The archaeologists watched in quiet distress as beauty that had survived 2,000 years disappeared within minutes. It was a sobering realization. History does not always want to be seen all at once. From that moment forward, caution guided every decision. Temporary shelters were erected over the pits, shielding the figures from sun and wind. Excavations slowed to a careful rhythm, guided by small tools, soft brushes, and steady hands. The work became almost meditative. Each warrior was approached as an individual, not as part of a crowd. Soil was removed grain by grain. Cracks were stabilized before widening. Fragments were documented, photographed, and supported before being lifted. Silence often filled the air, broken only by the sound of breath or the gentle brushing of earth from clay. The archaeologists worked not against time, but alongside it. They studied ancient construction techniques to understand how best to protect the figures. They examined kill marks, fingerprints left by artisans, inscriptions etched quietly into bronze weapons. Every detail told a story, not just about the army, but about the people who built it. The excavation site became a place of learning and listening rather than conquest. The goal was no longer discovery alone, but preservation technology slowly joined the conversation. Scientists analyzed pigment fragments, developing new methods to stabilize color before exposure. Engineers monitored soil pressure and moisture levels. Chemists studied mercury traces to better understand the sealed burial chamber below. Historians cross-referenced ancient texts with physical evidence, confirming details long debated in academic circles. What emerged was not a single discipline's triumph, but a collaboration, a modern mirror of the ancient cooperation that once built the army itself. The warriors, though silent, seemed to demand respect. Their faces, now stripped of color, still carried extraordinary presence. Visitors described the feeling of being watched not in fear, but in awareness. Each figure stood with quiet dignity, shoulders squared, hands positioned with intention. The individuality of their expressions felt almost intimate, as if they were witnesses rather than artifacts. It was impossible to forget that these were not mass-produced decorations, but representations of real people, shaped with care and understanding. As excavation expanded, new pits revealed more surprises. Cavalry units emerged, horses standing tall beside their riders. Archers appeared in kneeling positions, their posture dynamic even in stillness. Officers stood taller, their armor more intricate, their expressions composed and commanding. The army was not uniform in pose or role. It was complex, organized, alive with implied motion. The deeper archaeologists looked, the more they realized the emperor's vision had been executed with astonishing fidelity to real military structure, yet restraint remained the guiding principle. The emperor's burial chamber, believed to lie beneath a massive earthen mound nearby, remained untouched. Elevated mercury levels in the soil confirmed ancient accounts, but danger and uncertainty counseled patience. Archaeologists chose not to rush forward, understanding that modern tools, no matter how advanced, still had limits. Some parts of history, they agreed, deserved to remain protected until humanity could approach them without harm. This decision marked a quiet shift in how the world treated ancient wonders, rather than claiming ownership through exposure. Scholars embraced stewardship. The Terracotta Army became a lesson not just in history, but in responsibility. It taught that preservation is an act of respect, and that wonder deepens when it is approached slowly. Visitors from around the world began arriving, standing silently before the pits, absorbing the presence of the warriors without demanding more than what was offered. In these moments, the army took on a new role. It was no longer guarding an emperor, it was guarding time itself. Each warrior became a bridge between centuries, connecting ancient ambition with modern curiosity. Children gazed upward at the figures with wide eyes. Scholars stood quietly, notebooks forgotten in their hands. Travelers spoke in hushed tones, sensing that loud voices did not belong here. The site transformed into a space of reflection rather than spectacle, and in the background, the work continued. Day after day, archaeologists returned to the pits, guided by patience rather than deadlines. They learned to accept that the army would not be fully revealed in their lifetimes, that this was not failure, but wisdom. The Terracotta Army had waited 2,000 years. It could wait longer as seasons passed. Protective structures evolved into permanent museums. Climate control systems were installed. Pathways guided visitors without disturbing the soil. Educational centers grew nearby, sharing the story of the emperor. The artisans, the soldiers, and the farmers whose shovel first struck clay. The site became not just a destination, but a conversation, a place where past and present met without trying to overpower one another. The silent legion stood firm through it all. They did not resist excavation, they did not rush to be revealed, they simply allowed themselves to be understood, one figure at a time. And perhaps this is their greatest lesson, that some of history's most powerful voices do not shout, they wait, they endure. To remember that the past is not something to conquer, but something to care for. As night falls over the site and lights dim within the museum halls, the warriors remain standing, their shadows stretching gently across the floor. They have crossed centuries without moving. They have survived ambition, collapse, and rediscovery. And now, in their quiet awakening, they continue to teach the world how to approach memory with humility. The silent legion is no longer asleep, but it is still patient, still watching, still waiting for understanding rather than command. As the world learned to approach the Terracotta Army with patience and care, something quietly remarkable happened. The figures beneath the earth, once imagined as guardians of an emperor's power, began to reveal a different purpose, one shaped not by command or conquest, but by reflection. To leave behind a trace that speaks gently across centuries. The emperor's dream of immortality did not unfold as he intended. His dynasty fell swiftly after his death, and the rigid systems he built loosened under the weight of time. Yet his legacy did not vanish. It transformed. Where authority faded, artistry remained. Where fear dissolved, curiosity grew. The Terracotta Army endured not because it enforced power, but because it preserved human effort with astonishing honesty. Standing before the warriors today, one does not feel dominated. One feels invited. The soldiers do not threaten. They wait. Their presence is calm, their expressions thoughtful, their stillness profound. It becomes clear that they are not monuments to domination, but mirrors reflecting the countless hands and lives that shaped them. They remind us that even the most ambitious visions depend on ordinary people, craftsmen who shaped clay, laborers who carried weight, artists who cared about detail even when no one was meant to see. The army's survival also teaches a quiet lesson about time. Buried away from light, protected by darkness and earth, it escaped the erosion that consumes so many human creations. Palaces crumble, paintings fade, words blur, but these figures endured because they were hidden, because they were left alone. In their seclusion, they were preserved by the very thing humans often fear. Sometimes, being unseen is what allows a story to last. As visitors walk through the museum halls, footsteps soften naturally. Voices lower. The space itself seems to ask for gentleness. Children tug at their parents' sleeves, pointing at faces that feel both ancient and familiar. Scholars pause longer than they expect to, absorbed not by data but by presence. Travelers who came seeking spectacle often leave with something quieter, an awareness of continuity, of connection, of the fragile thread that binds past to present. The Terracotta Army has reshaped how the world understands ancient China. It has confirmed historical records, revealed astonishing levels of organization, and showcased artistry that rivals any civilization's finest achievements. But beyond facts and figures, it has given humanity something rarer, a shared moment of wonder that does not demand urgency. There is no need to rush. The army waited 2,000 years. It teaches us that patience can be powerful and still. The underground palace remains sealed. Beneath the mound nearby, the emperor's tomb rests undisturbed, its rivers of mercury flowing unseen, its starry ceiling shining without witnesses. Scientists monitor, measure, and prepare, knowing that restraint is not ignorance, but respect. The decision to wait to let some mysteries remain intact honors the balance between curiosity and care. It acknowledges that knowledge is not only about uncovering, but about choosing when not to. In this way, the Terracotta Army continues to evolve. It is no longer a relic of one man's fear, but a lesson shared by many cultures. It speaks about ambition and humility, about creation and consequence, about the beauty that arises when countless individuals contribute to something larger than themselves. It reminds us that history is not loud by nature. It becomes loud only when we listen poorly. When we slow down, it speaks softly, clearly, and with grace. As evening light fades across the fields of Shanxi, the land settles into its familiar quiet. The same soil that once concealed an empire now supports a place of learning and reflection. Wind moves gently over the ground. The sky deepens into indigo. Somewhere beneath that calm surface, clay soldiers stand as they always have aligned, attentive, patient. They are no longer guarding a ruler. They are guarding memory. They are holding space for wonder. And as the night grows still, the army seems to breathe with the earth itself, reminding us that immortality is not found in elixirs or command, but in the care with which stories are made, preserved, and shared. What endures is not power, but presence, not fear, but craft, not conquest, but the quiet beauty of human hands shaping meaning from the simplest materials. In the end, the Terracotta Army does not ask us to marvel at an emperor. It asks us to remember one another and to rest gently with the understanding that some stories are meant to unfold slowly, beneath the surface, waiting for hearts calm enough to listen.